Considering it's been part of wrestling culture for more than 90 years now, I suppose it's about time we dedicated a video to breaking tables. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. And if you are passionate about the craft of professional wrestling and you're never done learning all about it, then you've landed in the exact right place. Join my Till We Make It tribe. Subscribe down below. Or if you want to take your support of this channel and your participation to the next level, consider joining me over on Patreon, a link to which is down below. If you're under the impression that breaking tables in professional wrestling dates back to the Attitude Era or even the glory days of ECW in the mid-1990s, you might be shocked to discover that this actually goes all the way back to the 1930s, and not here in the United States, but rather over in the United Kingdom. When Cornish wrestling, Lancashire wrestling, and various smaller regional styles all end up in the same melting pot, the result is all-in wrestling, and this explodes in popularity throughout all of the 1930s. Promoters quickly discover that the demand for more cards has outstripped the available skilled talent, and so less skillful wrestlers end up being booked into novelty matches to fill up cards. These novelty matches include weapons bouts with chairs and tables, and even mud wrestling, until all of it gets outlawed in 1939 at the outset of World War II. Tables might have been outlawed in the United Kingdom, but they pop up on the US radar in the 1970s, even into the early 1980s, at outlaw promotions like Angelo Paffo's ICW out of Lexington, Kentucky. If you were lucky enough to attend an ICW card back in the day, you might have seen a young Macho Man Randy Savage pile drive his opponents right through a table. But breaking tables becomes synonymous with outlaw promotions because of the change in regulations in the UK, the designation of outlaw promotions for companies like ICW in the US, and the image that ECW carefully cultivated in the 1990s. And although we've been breaking tables in professional wrestling for the better part of a century now, it is not the kind of thing that ever gets taught in pro wrestling schools. In fact, it is rarely spoken about. And yet, I think there are 4 really important things you need to know to minimize the risk of anything going wrong when it's time to break a table. Up first, any table break needs to be cleared in advance by the people in charge. You know that old saying about how it's easier to obtain forgiveness than it is to obtain permission? That does not apply here. Anytime you plan to do a little bit of property damage by breaking a table, you need to clear that with the promoter or whomever is in charge of running the show in advance. And you might want to get clear with management on who is meant to bear that expense. If you are going to them with the idea that you want to break the table in your match, don't be surprised if you're expected to foot the bill. In my experience, there's been at least a handful of promoters I have worked for who made it known if you pick up a chair and damage it during the show without the office's approval, you're paying for that chair. And the same thing goes for tables or anything else that might be broken during the course of a pro wrestling match. And that's a point you're going to want to be clear on beforehand. There's always an aircraft overhead when I am filming these. Always. Up second, if you are tasked with choosing or even going out to purchase the table, you don't want a 6-foot table. You want an 8-foot table. And most hardware stores will have both sizes readily available. When given the choice, you want an 8-footer. They are easier to break because of where the legs are underneath the table. 6-footers are far less likely to break. So given the choice, you want an 8-footer. Up third, do not remove the metal runner from underneath the table in advance. I'm talking about the long piece that runs underneath the table and gives it its stability. And yes, removing it in advance will make the table easier to break, but the problem with that is, without this stabilizing the table, it may snap in half just from having the opponent placed on top of it. So if you've ever seen a table that has begun to bow or even break before any moves have occurred, it is because the runner has been removed partially or entirely. Up fourth, especially if you have an 8-foot table, do not saw, sand, or do anything else to weaken the stability of the table in advance. Just like when you remove the runner from underneath, this is likely to cause the table to break before it's supposed to. If you're learning something today, leave a like-a-palooza. It tells YouTube that your old pal Mike is doing a good job. And if you like that history lesson at the top of today's episode, then you're gonna love Pro Wrestling History. 6 Threads and 16 Decades is my latest audiobook. I trace 6 unique innovations throughout history, starting all the way back at the US Civil War, coming all the way up to WrestleMania 35, and it's awaiting your eager ears over on Audible.